Welcome back to the Two Pointers Podcast. I'm Trevor Everett, and as you can see in the title, we are going to talk about Game 1 of the NBA Finals between the Celtics and the Mavericks, what that means moving forward. It obviously wasn't as exciting of a game as we'd all would have liked or have hoped, so you might not hear a lot of that from us. Just some, the typical things that we do on this podcast. Chris and I are going to figure out a way to talk about it for 30 minutes, and it'd probably be 45. So, before we jump into that, don't forget SeatGeek is the presenting sponsor of the Two Pointers Podcast. $20 off your first purchase. Obviously, I'm running out of basketball things to talk about and get $20 off for, so we're going to go with baseball, concerts, sporting events of some kind, like the TST is going on here locally around me, which is really cool. Those tickets are really expensive, so $20 off if it's on SeatGeek. Your first purchase, link in the top of the description, gets you those ticket deals there. All right, so without further ado, we're going to talk about the NBA Finals. Like I said, Game 1. For those that might be new here, at this point, this feels like a routine a little bit, but hey, this is the finals. Couldn't do the lives like we wanted to. Honestly, kind of glad because I don't think I'd have any of the thoughts I have right now last night. And so last night would have been us complaining about how bad Game 1 is, which is still going to happen. So first of all, how are you? And introduce yourself to the 4 people that don't know who you are by this point.
Yeah, things been good. Long-time listener and long-time guest of the Two Pointers Podcast. So always grateful for another opportunity to come on and talk ball with Trevor. You mentioned it. We went live after each of the 5 finals games last year. And it was kind of tough to really put thoughts on paper as we were watching, just to know that I didn't have time to simmer on it, kind of gauge the reaction publicly and kind of factor that into my opinion. So it was nice to be able to go back, pick apart a little bit on League Pass, some things that I might have missed because everybody saw the final score. It was not a close game for a large majority of really the entire game. But it was nice to go back. Some clips circulated on social media of key plays, key sequences. It kind of kept things fresh for me throughout the day as I tried to put down some notes and things that I knew we would both want to touch on through one game. So, not a thriller by any stretch of the imagination. We'll always have an 8-point game for like that 40-second stretch in the third quarter. But, I mean, we've both said it. This is the lowest floor 60-win team ever, but they have a pretty high ceiling when things are clicking. And that started with Kristaps Porzingis, the most identified X factor in the history of X factors, but he showed exactly why last night. I think he was a huge part of why we had a bit of a snooze fest to start the finals.
Yeah, I have a couple of things on his start. Just for context for the listeners on the background of this, I had to rewatch it this morning, so I'm very glad we did not do live last night. Basically did not have power and internet for the first, let's say, 2 hours of real time of the game. So I'm glad that I had the time this afternoon before we did this to go back and learn a few things. Because honestly, the first half was more interesting than the second half, regardless of the 8-point cut lead there. I want to lead with this. You think the finals is sponsored by YouTube TV or what? There's 6 freaking logos on the floor. I didn't even notice that last night. I was like,
we can't get the Larry O'Brien, but we get YouTube TV. I mean, what are we doing?
It's in the script of the cursive, and that's all we get.
Right.
I just wanted to leave with that because I literally watched it back and I was like, and the parquet floor and Boston and green, it's like off-putting. There's like red all over the place.
Yeah,
it does.
It looks a miss.
It's weird. As an avid, happy YouTube TV subscriber, by the way, I'm not saying that to be rude.
It's not the product; it's how awful it looks on that floor.
I could not. There was when Porzingis hadn't checked in yet, and I was like really trying to focus on the first few minutes without him because I knew that he obviously didn't start. I was like, I had a hard time focusing because I was like, okay, Al Horford, wait, hold on, sorry, back it up. I was trying to count how many times I saw it on the floor in the stands on the wall. I wasn't even counting the little thing that like Mike Breen and them sit behind either. So I'm just counting. This is just counting the 2 digits on the floor, the 2 logos, and the 2 ones on the sideline. It's just stupid. Anyway, all right. So the thing I wanted to kind of talk about, at least early on, that I thought was interesting because you weren't the only person to text me last night. Well, Porzingis is obviously the X factor we all expect. I got that text 5 times, which is awesome because it's true. But Horford's offensive minutes, the first 6 minutes were incredible. I was honestly, I went back and watched that a couple of times. They just kept giving up a ton of rim pressure. It just kept happening and it kept happening and it kept happening. Maybe he had a few plays in there, don't get me wrong, but Does Joe Mazzulla make that adjustment in the past? Like, obviously, Porzingis is like, it's kind of a loaded question now, but like, Porzingis is there and available and healthy. We hope and think, and we now know, as I've been saying for weeks, that he's going to be the guy they need to put out there. But I'm just glad. I guess it's less of a question. I'm just glad he made that adjustment when he did. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think with any job in any field, you get more comfortable with your ability to kind of audible or make changes. And I think we forget that he is in year 2 of being a coach. So I think that a head coach at least. He's kind of grown into that role. He had the team to accomplish things like this from the start, but he just kind of had to, find the confidence in himself, honestly, before any of the very harsh Boston media decided to find any confidence in him, which wavers. Despite their, like we've mentioned, 60-win regular season, they've lost, I think, 2 playoff games to this point. They sit 3 games away from Larry O'Brien, number 18. So it's just one of those sports cities that's never happy until you're in the middle of the parade. So that's part of the deal. He knew that and took the job. But young coaches, at least in their tenure as head coaches, impress me when things like that happen. So, I don't think he has the ability to coach them out of a title or to a title. I think he's just right for being able to facilitate this incredible roster they do have. They had contributions from everybody. A lot better bench play even last night. And, we can at least give partial credit to him for his rotations. Sam Hauser had struggled. He put him out there, hit the corner 3 right at the end of the first half to really blow that score to,
a couple
I
of
believe
them.
it was, yeah.
Like counting the one where he the now viral video of him catching it in stride. I mean, like it's something you don't see often from people. Mm-hmm. It's funny you mentioned the 3-point shooting. So this is the part this is the part that I'm struggling with because like there's this overarching bigger question I think we should get to, but this kind of opens with it. These are the best 2 3-point shooting teams in the league.
Yeah.
Coming into the series, right? If one of them has an off night, it's going to give us an extra level of variance that I don't think is like realistic if this was Boston being the best 3-point shooting team in the league and the 11th best. Like if the 11th best team has a bad night, that's okay. That's expected, right? Dallas doesn't rely on it by any stretch of the imagination. I know what that sounds like when I say that, but they don't rely on it because they have bigs that they're comfortable with. The problem I'm realizing is the gap between the teams actually might be bigger than we think, and it might be because of the 3-point variance. I think that actually might just put more of a gap on the two. Where's your head at with that? Or is this just okay, it's game 1, let's overreact a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we're always going to overreact. And we were here 2 years ago when Boston won game 1 in the finals. And obviously we know the rest of that series went great and no hiccups ever happened for Boston. So, 1 game sample size for now. But I saw something from KOC on Twitter today, just kind of trying to get a sense of where a lot of the talking heads I look to for information were at. And he tweeted the stat that when Boston takes over half their shots from 3, they're 35-4, which speaks to, one, how comfortable they are shooting a lot of threes. And to your point, as far as where they rank in the NBA, how good they are at it and how just overwhelming they can be when they're falling. And that's when the other team is hitting shots. Dallas from 3 last night was terrible. They were 7 of, what was it? Something. They were shot like south of 30%. It was not good.
Yeah, 7 of
as
like
a Thunder fan who watched
them
shoot. Yeah. As a Thunder fan who watched them shoot 60% for 2 weeks, I was very, very bitter. But it's just not, that's not going to beat Boston. Even Luka, he had a couple of his, trademark, just deep ones, but it wasn't sustained enough as a team to keep them in the game. They did claw back with that extended. It was essentially a quarter of game time from the late stages of the second quarter to late stages of the third quarter. The lead went from 29-8, and then Boston immediately went on like a 13-14-0 run. And you felt like the game was in the bag as they got through the third quarter. So I think, the threes for Boston don't necessarily have to be elite if Dallas is going to have nights like this, which I don't think is going to be their average for this year. I think they're going to improve, especially when they get back to Dallas, 1-1, 2-0, whatever. But I think that it was eye-opening because it just makes you realize how hard it is to beat Boston anyway. But then the 3-point disparity, even if you are an elite 3-point team, if you can't keep up with them, we're going to have more final scores just like this.
Probably going to have 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because like the thought that I had, and many people had truly, but like the thought that I had when I was talking to Chris O'Brien, I don't know about, I can't say last week at this point because it was earlier this week, right? But was, hey, like I ultimately landed on Mavs in 7, which is, if you had told me
I did too. Yeah.
mid-March that I'd say that, like, nope, someone else is doing the podcast, I guess. But my whole thing was what Boston does well defensively isn't, the Mavs can negate it, essentially. The Mavs can figure out a way around it. And the exact opposite happened. They were able to keep Dallas out of the corners. They shot 3 corner threes entirely, right, which is what's been really successful. Everything for PJ Washington was at the top of the key. Everything like that, just like every little decision. Again, I'm not trying to like be like, well, would Joe Mazzulla have done this last year or 2 years ago, whatever. That's not my whole point here. But like that, clearly something has changed in that regard. I'm going to give him credit for the progression in that. But I'm also going to give them credit in the game plan, not only offensively sticking to it, because if this, I probably still think they win by 10 if they have a 35% three-point shooting night, because I just think that's just the kind of level that they've reached where they're able to make these decisions defensively, like forcing guys to the corners, right, and forcing Kyrie away from the middle of the paint, right? All of Kyrie's shots that were all 11 points of them that were difficult were within like 5 feet, like to the left and to the right of the basket, if I'm making any sense, basically outside the paint. That was basically the goal, was to force him out in the outsides, and it worked. Everything they did that I thought they couldn't do, they did. I don't know where, why, how, when that I was expecting that to be the case, but it happened.
Yeah. I mean, in the defense, if they're defending 1 through 5, including Al Horford, who was just turned back the clock about as far back as we are old last night, and was excellent defensively. The statistics on shot contests were excellent. Now, that's not something I wouldn't count on if you're Boston. I don't know if we see that, through the rest of the series, but to have the oldest guy on the floor set the tone like that defensively, I thought was huge. And just, exercising the demons from 2 years ago. I thought, the kind of sleepwalking narrative that we've encountered with this Boston team, this is the best team they've played in the playoffs. And if they're playing well enough, I think they can avoid it. But their problem the entire regular season, the entire playoff run has been the good games are there. It's just we never get a full series of them. That's why they played 5 in the first round. That's why they played 5 in the second round. And they really could have played 6 or 7 against Indiana if they had really. I mean, there was the one game they were down 5 with like 40 seconds left. And I think just the lack of experience outside of Siakam really doomed the Pacers, who were like, at that point in the house money portion of their playoff run, they're like, oh wait, we're in these games, like what, like no, it was so I was impressed with Boston. I thought just a weird narrative as far as like everybody seems to be picking Dallas because they think that the Celtics will just be due forever. I mean, eventually a team this good's going to break through.
History tells us so. I mean, it does.
Right. And the stat you had earlier this week about the guys that have, as great players overcome great teams, the list is Jordan, LeBron, Magic Johnson. I mean, that's
end of list.
Insane. Right.
For those who didn't hear it, by the way, it's important for context to finish your point. If Luka wins this finals, I say Luka wins this finals because it's going to take him doing whatever he's going to do. Kyrie's going to have a game or two, right? We're going to get the Derek Lively or PJ Washington game's coming. It just is, right? Those two. It's not Derek Jones Jr. It's not Josh Green.
If I had to watch 4 PJ Washington games, there better be one in the finals.
Somebody, one of those guys is going to have one, right? It's probably going to be at home, game 3 and game 4, back against the wall, that kind of thing. For context, if Luka were to win this finals, the list of teams, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm just paraphrasing slightly, but there's 7 teams ever, and some of these are repeat of the guys, obviously. 7 teams ever to win less than 20 games and lose in the finals. And the people that defeated them are Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, and LeBron James. So that's the list Luka would be on. Luka would be the 4th guy ever to do that. So, again, roundabout way to talk about that stat, but it just needs to be said because, again, I led with the disparity of these two or the distance between these two potentially, and at least through one game, I don't know.
I don't know either. I mean, to lose less than 20 games in a season that extends all the way to the finals is just incredible. And it truly takes Herculean individual efforts, supported by a capable supporting cast. Obviously, they wouldn't be in the finals. And that seemed like the most LeBron and like one or two other people of all time. Not that Michael Jordan is other people or Magic Johnson, but it just speaks to how incredible you have got to be individually to take down a team that's been, I hate to use the word consistent with the Celtics, but over the sample size we've got, they do not drop a lot of games. They might look bad for 47, 46 minutes. We just saw it in the Eastern Conference Finals. But they find ways to beat you, and that's why they're in the finals. And I'll tell you what, the most impressive thing to me was not the run by Dallas to cut it from almost 30 to under 10. It was the immediate Boston, like, okay, this is not the team 2 years ago. This is not the team everybody thought was in a mental battle with Miami. Like, we are the better team. We're at home, and we're not going to have this. And it was a 20-point game 3 minutes later. So that told me a lot about Boston, where they are mentally, as far as their ability to in-game kind of react to things going wrong. And so that impressed me. Like the run was 14-0 to end the third quarter. And that game went from a game when I texted you, and 5 minutes later, I literally said, like, never mind. Like, this is 1-0 Boston.
Actually, I'll pull it up because it was really funny. I got a good laugh out of it because
the timestamps are like so close together.
I'll pull it up because it's worth it. So it was, let's see. Let's scroll back here. All right. So I explained the internet at the house situation. All right. Here we go. All right. So I said, all right, I'm locked back in at 10:04 p.m.
Right.
And at 9:33 p.m. was the first, like, okay, it's over, because that was when I was still getting back and figuring on internet.
Right.
That's, I think mid-second or whatever, they were up like 28. Because it went from 28 to 21 at half. That was kind of the thing. It was like, I think that was, okay, it's over.
Right.
That's all right. 10:04 after half, I'm locked back in now, second half. 10:05, creeping back in it. So you're giving me an update as I hadn't missed a little bit. I'd missed a little bit there. At 10:21, I said JK. And I think I sent that late too, because it was like already in the fourth by the time I looked up and was like, "Oh crap!"
And it was like 15 when I sent that. I was like, I looked up, I'm like, okay, it's south of 20. We may have something worth watching for another hour and a half. And we got barely 15 minutes worth.
So I knew you were going to do that, bring up the point about the lead, and so I think something needs to be added for context for why it's important. This is going to sound crazy for a team that, like you said, lost less than 20 games in an entire season, including the playoffs. But the Celtics, they're capable of doing this. They're capable of going from 28. But it's also like, if I'm just being real for a second, no team ever can keep up a 20. Like, it just doesn't. 28 points, like, the team's going to fight back, right? They're fighting against their will, especially in the finals. But when the Celtics give up leads, they continue to jack up threes, and they don't create rim pressure. And that was why Dallas came back. That was one of the biggest reasons. The only thing is if, like, they're always capable of doing that because they stick to the game plan. So that was kind of like my roundabout point with Joe Mazzulla was, can he figure out the adjustment outside of the game plan? He has not had to do that so far, but I promise you that at some point in the next 4 games, because if not, it's going to be 4 games probably.
It will be 4, yeah.
But my point is like, I'm not convinced yet that he can make that adjustment. So I hope we do this again in a couple. I hope we do this after Game 3 in Dallas, and it's 2-1, and I'm like, didn't make the adjustment. There was something in that third quarter. Maybe it's fourth quarter. Maybe it's the example we all did, and the whole reason the entire world picked Dallas. Right? I think it was like 9-8 of the ESPN people they polled or whatever. 9-8 Dallas. Yeah. I'm like, wow, okay, that's insane. Obviously, their job is to get people to click on things, but at the end of the day, like, if it's under 5 minutes. And it's game 1 through game 7, doesn't matter. Game 7 specifically. That was my whole point was, I think if Dallas can get them to 7, Luka's going to have the Boston Celtics fans doing exactly what they did when they were holding their breath in the middle of that third quarter. People like Bill Simmons, whoever, anybody that was in the building that did it, that has a microphone, was like, we all knew it was coming, and we all reacted accordingly, and the building air just went sucked right out of it, right?
It's pin drop, yeah.
Can Joe Mazzulla figure out what's happening in that run and say, no, keep checking up threes. That's okay, because we're shooting 40%. They were shooting, like, whatever at the time it was, 40%. They ended up finishing the game 38.1. My point is I'm not sure that run happens if they actually figure out an adjustment to make that run not happen.
Right, and to play devil's advocate a little bit, you have to play pretty well to be up that amount in the first place, but it is very, very dangerous, especially against one of the most feared players in the NBA for runs, just like we saw the 20-point run to get it down to a game again in Luka. And Luka's also the most unafraid of any building for Game 7 ever. So, and this Boston team has been harped on how poorly they play at home in the postseason relative to other teams, especially at the top of playoff brackets. So I think that's important to note. Game 7 could be on Mars. It does not matter. I don't want to be playing Luka Doncic in Game 7. I don't care where it is, when it is, who he's playing. Something clicks in his brain, and it's a very, very bad thing to look across the court and see. So I would not recommend Boston dance with this team for 7 games. But something about these game ones, Dallas has got to figure out. They're now 1-6 under Jason Kidd in game ones in the playoff series. And I mean, they've overcome this playoffs already. They knocked out the Thunder. They won 4 out of 5 after they lost game 1. But just to continually, and a lot of these are on the road too, so keep that in mind. But you can only dig that hole so many times and get out of it. They kind of steamrolled Minnesota in the Western Conference Finals. They won the first 2 games of that series, both in Minnesota. But I just thought that's one of those things that is kind of shocking. 1, because they're in the finals. And 2, just because I guess they play a lot of game 7s. They play the Clippers almost every year. Some things repeat themselves, and that's just one of those trends that as much as Kidd has grown as a coach in Dallas, I'm stunned to look down at that. Because I remember the Minnesota game was the first game 1 of a playoff series they had won during Kidd's tenure there. And so I just tacked one on last night to that stat. But that's still one that just jumps out at me, to say the least.
Yeah, I've always said basketball is a 48-minute game, and obviously obviously it is, right? Duh. But I've always said, like, these really important runs early in the game are only but so important if A, you don't have the best player on the floor that can win you down the stretch we've already talked about.
Right.
B, you give up a 30-point lead down to an 8-point lead. Or C, any other scenario that can finish the game. Right? Yeah. This Boston Celtics team, they did figure it out. That's ultimately the point I'm making here.
Yeah.
But the most important run of the game, as rare as it is for me to say this, the most important run of the game was 23-5 the last 6 minutes of the first quarter. That doesn't happen. I'm not sure that we're sitting here saying the Boston Celtics dominate, like the title says, Celtics dominate game 1 of NBA Finals. I'm not sure that happens. So them coming out and setting the tone, obviously a lot of that has to do with the crowd. The crowd was incredible. I mean, it was a crowd that I'd never. We've heard some incredible telecasts and the way they do it, but that crowd was in it. Bill Walton stuff helps, I'm sure. Like everything about it, the fact that they've been off for so many freaking days at that point, weeks at that point.
A week, yeah.
So it's just at that point they were fueled up, they were ready. It felt bigger because I think the expectations are just boiling over into this. Like it just feels like the team knows it.
Sure.
So it just felt like it was one of those things that I couldn't ignore. Drew Holiday, we should not have went 23 minutes now officially without mentioning Drew Holiday. And maybe you did at some point in one of those, and I just maybe missed it. But the fact that you're going to open up ESPN this morning and be like, wow, well, Drew didn't have a whatever. Drew was the difference in the final 8 minutes. He just was. He was on Luka, had 2 fouls in the first half early. Luka had 27 points whenever he got Holiday switched on him in the fourth quarter. Luka finished with 30. So
right.
I'm ready to say that that's the difference maker. And we all thought it was Porzingis. We all put it, but like Drew Holiday's defensive ability is going to change everything about this series.
Drew Holiday is the reason the headline this morning was Porzingis and not Doncic with 46. And who knows, they may still lose, but it was the first quarter I wrote down, I was watching it back just because of how it felt like they just overwhelmed them. At the 3-minute mark in the first quarter, Boston was up 6. They closed 13-2. I believe I saw the stat. That is the biggest first quarter lead in the game 1 of the finals ever.
It is.
37-20 Boston.
They said it coming out of the second quarter transition. Yep.
I had the 3 straight threes in the last minute and a half-ish. Hauser was one of them. That's just one of those things that gets a building like that just alive, and they stayed alive for about another 2 hours until that little blip in the third quarter. I hate to call a 20-point run a blip, but I mean, this game was in hand for about 44 of 48 minutes. They just blitzed him from the start. Derek White, Porzingis carried the offense early. The Tatum slander Twitter piece of this is I pulled some Celtics fans just trying to pull some things from people that were more locked in than me, just given the score. Um, he, I think, has an impact, and it's not seen in the box score. I think he was drawing enough attention to get other guys open, things like that, making the right passes if he pulled double teams, which you will not see on the ESPN box score. And I realize that. I think the notion that he is some kind of role player is absurd. And obviously, if you have a Mavs logo as your Twitter, Avi, you can just say whatever you want after a loss like that. I'm sure they weren't thinking clearly. But I just think that, and plus you have Jaylen Brown, and he's smart enough to know that Jaylen Brown will and can continue to pick up the scoring. I guess slack is a word. I don't want to call it slack, but if it's clear that night that Tatum can bring this team to a win without having 30, without having 20, I think he's more than intelligent enough to realize that. And that's why I think Brown had 22 and Tatum had 16. The turnovers aren't great. He had 6. But that's the kind of stat you forget about when you win by 18. Also, it was interesting. After the first quarter, it's a pretty dead even game, and I realized a lot of that is what the score was and what it ended up being. But if you're Dallas after Kyrie's worst finals game of his career, the 3-point stuff we've mentioned, they were bad from the free throw line again. I went and pulled this. The Mavericks have shot more free throws than any team in the postseason, and it is not close. And they are also the worst free throw shooting team in the playoffs, and it's not particularly close.
I would have never guessed that. I would have guessed
as good as they closed against Minnesota, Oklahoma City, etc. You'd never think that.
I can't figure out which one I would rather. I think I would be more surprised by the misses, I guess, right?
Yeah, they missed 7 last night. I
don't know.
I mean, Boston wasn't great either. They missed 6, but 5 of those were Brown. So that was something that shocked me, because I noticed I'm like 12 and 19. I mean, obviously, if you go 19 for 19, you're still going to lose, but that's a lot of points at the free throw line. So I went onto the NBA stats and did a couple sliders, and I'm like, good Lord. When you have Luka Doncic on your team, you're going to shoot some free throws. I'll leave my Thunder bias there. But, I mean, it's how they've gotten here with that is shocking, especially, like I said, how good they've been in the clutch, seemingly. Obviously, there's a lot more clutch time basketball than free throws, but that's a really big part of it, especially if you're like them last night, trying to come back, you need points when the clock stopped. So if you're leaving points there, that's not great. There wasn't a clutch minute to be had officially last night, but that's something I'm definitely going to pay more attention to if we get into what I'm assuming will be closer games. There are only 3 or 4 or maybe 5 of them left. That was shocking to me. That and how poorly Lively appeared on the box score were my 2 alarming things for Dallas last night.
So before we get into looking forward a little bit, because as the people are going to hear this, they're going to have at least a full day before the next game, which is awesome. I kind of like it, the 3-game thing, especially for a team like it. Kind of evens it out a little bit. Boston had all this time to get healthy, even though Dallas won in 5. They played longer series anyway, so I feel like this evens it out a little bit. I kind of like how it's 1, 2, 3, and then it's just cranked up after that. Mm-hmm. Before we get into it, I didn't prep you for this, so apologize ahead of time. I'll give you the first one. But it's a game I've wanted to play forever, and we've never had a chance to, so I'm glad we're able to. It's just game 1, but. So I want a few. Take your time here. I have one for you. Mild one to start. It's not supposed to be a hot take. It's just like things that, maybe it's overreaction. We've done that before. Definitely done that plenty of times, the overreaction pod. It's just game 1, but championship DNA and experience obviously matters. It matters after all. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like I sat there and was like, you mentioned the run in the third quarter and how they just kind of locked in and they were like, we're not going to do this. Drew Holiday. Wow, the guy we just spent 5 minutes talking about. Again, this is not supposed to be some fancy drawn out segment for TikTok, but it's just one game, but championship experience clearly matters, and it probably will matter the rest of the series. Mm-hmm. Anything else that you might have not? I know I didn't prep you for it, but obviously it ties to any other point you might have had written down you hadn't gone through with. But.
Kyrie Irving shot 6 for 19 in this game, but if you're Boston, you do not bank on that again this series. I don't care if it's in Boston where he's lost 10 in a row, 11 in a row now. I think for a player of his caliber, speaking of championship DNA, has a ring with LeBron James. I was stunned by that, and I get the hostile environment. Fans were probably mean to him on courtside level, I'm sure.
I mean, the boos at minimum were audible. So
I,
that, yeah.
if that caught him any level of off guard, I have questions. But yeah, I think Kyrie is going to be a much improved version of himself. I think we've seen it throughout this playoff run, throughout this season. He has been basketball focused for more than he has been in several years. I think that speaks to where this team is, and he's a big part of that. And yeah, so that's my biggest but is Kyrie Irving was, by his own standard, bad last night. But I think given his finals experience, we just spoke on it. If they're going to overcome things like 70% of teams that win game one win the finals, he is going to have to be the Kyrie Irving that has been a major part of a championship team before.
It's just one game, but the Mavs might have overachieved this year a little bit.
Oh, I think that, yeah, I think we're there. I think the fact they got out of the West, I think that is where you kind of draw that line in the sand. Like, not that a team in the finals has hit their ceiling necessarily, but like, as far as, you took care of Minnesota, who's led by an incredible 22-year-old Anthony Edwards. It kind of felt like whoever came out of the West was going to seem like they may have overachieved if the Boston played like Boston should, which is not something they always do. Because if Boston beats either one of these teams in 5, we're like, well, wait, we just saw this West team play great for a month and a half. What the hell happened? I mean, they ran into a 7-win team. That statistically is in a lot of places where no one thinks they should be, but they are. And if they lift the trophy, then we're going to have a lot of conversations people don't expect about where this team ranks. I won't say all time, but at least in recent history, this is a very, very good team when you look at numbers and you look at things that you don't expect from a team that loses a game to an 8 seed at home or the 5 seed at home, things like that.
You remember the streak they were on earlier this year? That was like the whole 15-minute start with Noah Dazo on here was, hey,
right.
How realistic is this undefeated at home thing?
Right. And their most watched game was the game that the Pistons, who had lost 80 in a row, took them to overtime. And we were thinking, like, this is the most Boston Celtics loss of all time. And they ended up winning the game. But
was that Hawks one? Remember the Hawks one everyone keeps talking about? Was that in Atlanta? I think it was. Where they just had the collapse of like the century.
I mean, they get 5 of those a year in a good year. And then they sprinkle some more in the playoffs, as we've seen this year. But that was and we may get one this series, which is great. This means we do more than 4 of these. But I think that
I just want a finals hit. I'm like looking forward to. Like I just like after this, I'm like it's just one game, but I'm not looking forward to the rest of it. That wasn't prepared.
Yeah.
But like damn.
But I'm
like,
with you with overachieved. I think now a lot of things can change starting Sunday, but I think if this goes anything similar to how we saw last night, the rest of the duration of the series, then I think it's fair to say, maybe a year early, a little more Kyrie, a little more Luka together. We get another year of Lively, things like that. PJ Gafford, both midseason ads. That's not an easy thing to do on the fly, but they've done excellently.
Yep.
So far. Jaden Hardy, the only good player on their bench last night, will have another year under his belt. So I think that if they get swept, worst case scenario, that's as bad as they could do. I don't think there's reason to think this is some one and done scenario. I think they're right back in the thick of this next year. So I would agree at the moment with overachieved. Yeah.
I have one more. Do you have anything else with this? Just game one, but
the Mavericks had 9 assists, I think, last night. But I think it is statistically impossible for that to happen again. Luka had 1 in the first 3 minutes, and then that was it, which for him is shocking. He had 6 potential assists, which is a low for him in quite some time. I don't know if it was the stage, the venue, whatever it was, but I think my butt is the things that went wrong for Dallas last night, I don't think will happen concurrently again. We may have a bad 3 night. We may have a bad Kyrie night. We may have a bad bench night. Lively, to his credit, looked like a rookie in the NBA Finals. That's going to happen.
I was glad you
I
led
mean,
with that
yeah,
because, like, hello, like,
right.
obviously,
Can we settle down? I think, yeah.
5 fouls, same amount of fouls as rebounds.
Which, yeah, and they pay him for the latter. But yeah. Um, so I think, alarm bells, yes, and we may see the glaring things, but I think this Dallas team is good enough, and to Jason Kidd's credit as well. I think the areas they were poor in last night, we may see pop up again, but for them to pop up in succession like we saw last night, where we're looking at these stats and scores, and we're like 89 points from this Dallas team. And I mean, they scored, I believe, 92 in game one against Oklahoma City, and people like the sky is falling, and clearly it wasn't because here they are still playing. Um, but I think, like we saw in that Thunder series, I think that we see a much improved version of the Mavericks going forward in the season. At least I hope.
Yeah. All right. My last one actually ties into the stuff we want to get into. Of course, predicting, previewing, whatever for a second here of game 2, as well as some finals odds things that we want to touch on. So my final, it's just game 1, but we'll segue us a little bit into it. It's just game 1, but if this series goes like we think, 4, maybe 5, there's a case that Porzingis could win Finals MVP. It's actually realistic a little bit. It's just one game, but Porzingis can win it.
I want it to happen just so Knicks fans know they booed a Finals MVP on draft night.
It would be the funniest thing that's happened in the Finals in like 40 years.
I want a 40-minute apology from Stephen A. Smith on air. He's doing a lot of apologizing this week on air, but I think that I would love nothing more. And I've already seen the clip of him, bamboozled, hoodwinked, led astray the morning after that draft when they booed poor Mr. Porzingis off
and then
the
said
draft stage.
Stanley Johnson was a better choice.
That's Billy Cauley-Stein, who you can now watch play in Tahiti, I think. So it's that is aged so poorly.
It's not like it was funny because it got posted by No Ceilings, and I was like, "Oh, these guys wouldn't do this if it wasn't like
these NBA ready players." His exact words: "Ready right now."
Yeah, none of those guys were ready. By the way, none of those guys were rookie ready. That's the craziest thing about it. And look, I saw the video and I'm like, I honestly couldn't remember who he said. So like, and shout out to No Ceilings for like being willing to put that out there and be like, this little draft throwback for you. And I was like, okay. Right. So I watched it and I forgot what the clip was, and I just go, those were the names. Like that draft class was awesome, but my goodness,
you left draft night pleading for the Knicks to draft one of those gentlemen. Yeah, that was tough. No, I mean, Porzingis, I would love to see it. I think if a player not Brown or Tatum were to win the award, it would speak to just how, one, excellent this roster was constructed. If guys not in the forefront are contributing to the level that merits an award like that. I think the toxic aspect of NBA Twitter towards Jason Tatum, which it seemingly an alarmingly amount of them percentage wise, would love nothing more than a role player, I guess technically, to win this award over Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, who won the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, a trophy that I don't even know why we have, but sure. I would be very, very impressed. I think Brad Stevens would need more praise if that's possible at this point, because he's put this team here to this point, like I mentioned a while ago, 3 wins away from an 18th banner, one that they have not lifted in almost 15 years. So I think that would speak to how Boston got here. I don't know that Drew Holiday can impact away from the box score enough to merit that award, although he may be, if he's the Luka stopper in the fourth quarter, I don't know why else you have an MVP award if you're not going to give it to the guy who silences the best player on the court in Luka Doncic in multiple games. I don't even think it has to be every game. But I'll hear a case for Porzingis. I'll hear a case for Drew Holiday. Sam Hauser has a 10-3 game. Why not throw him on the ballot? Let Twitter vote on it to see Jason Tatum finish last. I think that's fine. But no, I would love a KP Finals MVP.
Well, what's crazy is like I look back at the set, and of course this is a one. It's just one game, but scenario. But Jaylen Brown, 22, 6, 2 assists, 3 steals, and 3 blocks.
3 of the 9 blocks they had. Yeah.
I know, but like Porzingis was like that we all knew he had him, but it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Tatum had a block as well. I remember that one. That was insane. But it didn't feel like Brown even had that good of a game because that's the kind of level he's becoming and reaching and has reached now officially. Like he's played incredible this playoffs, and I think he doesn't get enough credit as in gnarly as that might sound. But he didn't have an incredible game. I mean, he led them in scoring, sure, but I don't know. It's just interesting because it's like I just bring up the Porzingis thing. Obviously, we'll get into the odds in a second, but like that sheer amount of shock and impact, and it's not like he had like an unreal game either. He had 20 points, 3 rebounds, six rebounds, 3 blocks. Excuse me. Shot really well from the field in the 3. The point being is like that was like okay. The question was there, the question mark of his health, and now he broke through that. Now he's healthy. He can be the second best player in this series, and at that point, unless Tatum has like a moment, like a whatever, but if it's a 4-game series, Porzingis, if he has 2 to 3 good games, that's all he needs to win the Finals MVP at this point.
Right.
Long series, it's over. Like it's not happening. Like it's just not.
The threshold of good game is so different for those 2 players. I think it's much easier for Porzingis to hit that threshold than it is Jason Tatum, who I think played well last night. But if you go on Twitter, you'd think he had 4 points and 10 turnovers, which is why I don't recommend looking to social media for facts on much of anything, let alone sports. But I think that, there's a very real possibility if Porzingis, where he set the bar for himself last night, if he can continue that throughout this series, and it's as brief as I think we're both leaning towards right now, 4 games, 5 games. There's going to be a hell of a discussion to be had as the fourth quarter closes on, game 4 or game 5. We're like, well, we only have, 16, 20 quarters to go off of, who is the most impactful player in this short series. And I think through game 1, I think Porzingis should be absolutely squarely in the center of that discussion.
Right before we do this, I want to read this tweet because you mentioned Brad Stevens, and it's really funny. Tatum, at Phil Fan account, at Phil Fan ACC. Tatum is legit playing. This was 9:28 last night, so literally an hour into the game. Not even 58 minutes into the game. Tatum is legit playing like Cavs Sean Marion right now, and it doesn't matter. Oh, he's a Mavs fan. That makes sense. It doesn't matter because Bradley Stevens nerd has crafted the best 2K 5-out pro am team of all time. So credit to Brad Stevens. He did exactly what you said.
Right.
So, all right. So the odds thing, just because I think it's interesting, I'll read. This is from The Score, who gathered this all together. Again, I know The Score is not a gambling site. I know it's not an odds maker, but I'm just reading. They compiled the data for us. Thank you. Jason Tatum's odds before game 1, -120. He was the favorite in that series, or in the total series odds. Odds after game 1 are even. Jaylen Brown +600, now +320. Luka, this is for Finals MVP. I don't know if I said it. Luka +200, now +350, which is kind of crazy value technically if you think about it. Kyrie Irving +1,400 to +2,000. Derek White somehow was listed in this at +2,800, who's now +5,000, and he had a decent, a couple threes, whatever. Kristaps Porzingis is how we ended that last segment with. He was +5,000. He's now +550. So I don't have a question because I know you had something gambling related, but like, who would you still take for Finals MVP right now?
Well, I mean, I think if you have the opinion, like I think we've kind of steered ourselves towards, if this is a 4 or 5 game series, then you're essentially getting the odds of a Celtics 4 or 5 game series win with Porzingis. I think he's more than capable of this. His cardio will not get worse. I had a Celtics fan, shout out my buddy Kemp, let me know that, in his eyes, the 11 points in the first quarter was great, but the 9 in the final 3 quarters was not as ideal. And I think that kind of speaks to, yes, he was game ready for a time. And then, fatigue set in. His need on the court also decreased for a lot of that middle portion of the game, to be fair. But I think if this is baseline Porzingis, first time on a court in 38 days, I think live game action, you can run 5-on-5 for as many hours as you want in practice, full stop. It is not the same, especially in the NBA Finals. So I think if this is from a game shape, cardio, whatever you want to call it, standpoint, if Porzingis can do that out of the gate with as many how much adrenaline he's probably had and all those things they play into it. I think an even steadier version of him throughout how many more games we get in this series is going to have just that much of an impact for this Boston team.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, I'm not making like a huge, shocking prediction here. I think Jaylen Brown's odds are pretty good too. Obviously, I'm just saying, like, if
Oh
we're
yeah.
just thinking value wise, who do we think still wins it? That's not what we're
Mm-hmm.
talking here to do. I think Jaylen Brown's still, if you're getting him plus 320 after he was the best player in the game,
Mm-hmm.
statistically, of course,
Right.
I think plus 320 is not a bad shout. That was all I had on that. I knew that was something we were going to talk about. I knew you had something gambling related, and then, like I said, 30 expected, 45 happened. So, anything
Right.
else you got there on gambling we talk about?
Yeah. On the way out, a brief light at the end of the tunnel of not having a short finals 2 years in a row. Underdogs of more than 5 points in game one of the finals are 1-13 against the spread now. It does not go great. A lot of those are going to be on the road, as we saw last night. However, game two on, now games 3 and 4, they will not be 5-point dogs. So we're thinking game 2 and game 5 here. The next two in Boston, if we get a game 5. 20-11 against the spread as underdogs of 5 points or more. So that
One more time. I'm going to make sure I heard it right.
So after game one, underdogs of 5 points or more in the finals are 20-11 against the spread.
Okay.
And a abysmal 1-13 against the spread in just game one. Obviously, that has no bearing on any player or team in this series, but just one of those historical trends. We tend to have history repeat itself. So hopefully we get a game 5, game 6.
Yeah.
I don't know if our Mavericks in 7 takes have any sunshine to bask in a couple of weeks, but I think that at the very least we may be able to avoid a gentleman's sweep.
Home team wins game 1 of the NBA Finals. That group wins the championship 78% of the time.
Yeah, I mean yeah. But who better than the Celtics to mess that up? I mean, come on.
So true. Like you said it,
I
knew it was coming, and I still laughed. It's true. God bless America. I don't want people to sit here and think that we think this is doom and gloom for Dallas. Like, it's not. We ended the show with that, for crying out loud. Oh man. All right. Predict game 2, and then loosely predict if your thoughts have wavered, which we've done 47 minutes on. So I doubt the answer's changed.
Right. I think we get a close game 2. I think it's a close Boston win. I just can't, in good faith. I had a lot of faith in Dallas last night. I looked like a fool for a very large portion of that game, unfortunately. I mean, they've lost 2 or 3 game 2s in these playoffs. Boston has, to far worse teams than the Dallas Mavericks, both at home, obviously, as they're the 1 seed. But I just don't think, after, honestly, the response in the third quarter is what has me thinking they're going to be able to win a tight game with this Mavs team. We didn't get a true clutch win, but I mean, 16 minutes left. That's dwindling, especially the magnitude of the run that got them to a 3-possession game. The immediate response from that. So I'm thinking close Boston win, single-digit win, and then as far as going forward, I'm going to stick to Mavericks in 7. I'm just going to die on the hill. I just think that if there's a team that can overcome a 1-0 or even maybe a 2-0 hole, it is this Dallas team. It is Luka Doncic. Because we don't really have a problem until Dallas loses a home game. If they can hold serve at home, obviously it would go back to Boston 2-2, which I'd be thoroughly impressed with Dallas, especially what we saw last night, if that were to hold true. And then just going back to the fact that if by some miracle this does get to a game 7, if we're doing a draft of guys you want in game 7 of the playoffs, 1-1 is Luka Doncic every single time. I don't think it's close. Yep. So with that in mind, I will stick to Mavs in 7. Obviously, not a great start, but I will stick to my guns there.
I'm going to go with Boston does. I'm with you. Like, close game, I think, is probably right. I'll take that another step further, though, and I'll say it's probably the Derek White game. They've left him open enough that role players play really well at home.
They were daring him, yeah.
And he did. I mean, he hit what? He was 30. He played 35 minutes. He was 45.
2 threes early really set the tone. Yeah.
3 of 8 from 3. He had 5 assists. So, I mean, like, he was being complimentary. He was being available when the ball swung around the arc, and that was really what they needed him to. And obviously, the 5 assists speaks to he wasn't just chucking it up, which we knew he's not that kind of player. But He hasn't had that defensive stop thing yet in a while. Like he had I think he had a block in the Indiana series that was crazy or whatever. Drew obviously was the defensive anchor in game 1. I think it's the Derek White game. Role players play better at home. If not, he's just going to be like a shell of himself this series, and they probably could still win it 4 or 5, which is insane to think that Derek White, who's probably their third, fourth most important player, depending on the night. So I'm going to go with Boston wins probably 5-10, but it's going to feel closer for a while, and Derek White does something that's going to be like that. He's the Porzingis of game 2. I just think that's just how it's going to turn out. That. Once it goes back to Dallas, all bets are off, and we'll be here to talk about it. So,
exactly.
All right, plug away, and we'll get out of here.
Yeah, me and my college roommates have a podcast, the 1009. It's a lot of Clemson-related stuff. Clemson baseball's in the Super Regionals this weekend in Clemson. I'll be at the Saturday and Sunday games 1 and 2. It's a best of 3, so the 2 guaranteed. I will be boots on the ground for. Very excited to do that. Meeting up with a couple of Clemson people I know. It's always a good time, especially anywhere in Clemson. So a lot of that. I am the sole consumer of NBA basketball amongst that trio. Love them both, but I do a lot of the NBA stuff over there. That's why I jump at any chance to come talk with Trevor. So we'll touch on the NBA. We'll have 2 games in the books by the time we record next with that. There's always something Dabo says we have to talk about, unfortunately. There's a viral video Trevor sent me today about his not using the portal, which is just an evergreen joke because he will never, ever use it, which is fine. It's him and the troops, not in the portal. So we always have to talk about that because he's always going to be making fun of it for. So with that, Twitter at the 1009 just crossed 600 followers. So if you want to help us get towards 650 and 700, I would very much appreciate that.
Yeah, there's got to be a Clemson audience out here somewhere because they keep showing up for these spots. So got a big one against Florida. I was just looking at it. State plays Georgia, who's 42-15. That's going to be interesting. Look, college baseball is not going to be talked about on this podcast in any form or fashion, so that's, you guys know where to find it. It was really funny. Your co-host was like, yeah, unfortunately, we got to talk about the basketball or whatever. I think you made some comment like that to open the last one about Minnesota. I think at that point, I think Minnesota was down 3-1 at that point, which was really funny, and I was like,
right, yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, I don't know. The Dallas Mavericks are probably worth talking about, but obviously around here, that's the case. So, all right. Thank you as always. This has been the 2 Pointers Podcast. I'm Trevor Everett, and we'll see you sometime after game 2.